Alright, what is up YouTube? It's your boy Snub here, and today I'm going to be doing something that, well, first time for me, but this whole project was kind of a pain in the rear to get the information for. These 800H projectors are not very easy to find information on, especially when it comes to rebuilding them. Now, I picked this bad boy up at a thrift store with plans to, clean it up, resale it, ran it at the thrift store, worked great. What I wasn't aware of, because I didn't have any of my slides to test it with, was the solenoid link was busted. That was thanks to a Kodak forum online, but basically it's the thing where the turntable's down below here, or the spot where you put the slide cartridge, big cylinder thing, or the, what do they call it? The, for lack of a better term, quick change adapter, where you can just drop stacks of slides in, and it'll rifle through them, and then you can pull that stack out, put a new stack in, takes the hassle out of having to sort the slides. Anyways, where that goes up top, there's a little lever that kicks the slide carousel, the big plate with all slides, back and forth when you press the buttons, which are located on the back end here. Now, there is also a remote that comes with these that you can plug into the back normally, depending, thrift stores, sometimes people lost parts. But here's the rub. The remote has the same buttons, and it functions through the same solenoid. So if you can't get it to cycle forward or backwards with the remote or the projector itself, you're kind of SOL. Because that means you need to put the kit in, and this is what we're here to do today. Now, if it won't even pull slides, like if you push the button to select the slide, and the little capture arm doesn't move at all, like you get nothing out of it, there's probably a lot worse going on for you than just a solenoid arm. Luckily, for me, it was just a solenoid arm. So, I'll kind of show you how I got to where I got to. Now, this kit I purchased from Amazon. There's a guy that sells them on eBay for the both autofocus and non-autofocus projectors. The 800Hs, as far as I'm aware of, are only autofocus, which means they've actually got a button, normally, on the back of it, as well as the little remote that you can push to actually zoom in and zoom out to focus it without having to turn a little manual crank. I mean, there's a manual crank right down here for that already, but best not to use it if it's got an automatic, because that'll help wear out the motor faster if you're cranking on it by hand. Now, for my situation, I only needed the kit for manual. I say manual projectors because it gives you only the solenoid piece, which is the little T-shaped piece that goes right in here. The autofocus kit, which is usually about $10 more, comes with the solenoid as well as the autofocus gears. And the reason they say that is because usually the gears are made out of the same material. They will deteriorate over the same amount of time. So if this is shot, the gears are close to being shot. Now, I am installing the gears right now. It's about as far as I've gotten. I've gotten this sucker centered, and I'm about to center this one, which bolts right over here and mates with that gear, which drives the autofocus. Now, my gears were in perfectly good shape. However, you probably, if you don't have a gentle touch with these things, you'll probably end up busting them off anyway, so best to get the kit. Now, mine were in perfectly good shape, but at the same time, when I went to take them off, I did this thing most people suggest, which is, if they're not breaking off already, just squeeze them with a pair of pliers. So I did that. And that's what's left of them. So yeah, they were probably to the point where a little bit more heat and exposure to moisture or anything like that probably would have shot them anyways. Now, here's what I did to get this sucker off. So to start with, as you'll see in the instruction manual, that's the other thing. The kit I got was from Amazon. I don't know if I said this already. If I did, I'm sorry. But the kit I got from Amazon was about $20, I believe. The manual kit you can get off eBay for simply the solenoid plunger, which is the piece you need, is $15. Or you can get the kit I got off Amazon for $25. Now, I'd suggest getting one of the advanced kits with the autofocus if you have this projector or an autofocusing projector. Simply because you want to have those gears, because if you bust one, you can't just pick them up at a hardware store. They're that frickin' specific. So, most of them come with this little handy instruction manual. It looks kind of pretty simple, bare bones. Gives you all the instructions. Now, here's the thing. That's for a standard layout for a 600 or wait, not 600. The 500 carousel, you know, the usual ones that don't have anything fancy to them. You see them everywhere. If you go to a Salvation Army or Goodwill, odds are they'll have at least one in stock. Now, this is for the custom section, which basically covers the 6 to 600Hs. The 800H, there's some small differences, but if you look at the diagram here in comparison to this, very similar. However, there are some small differences, which is why I'm going to walk through this the way I did it, because they have different suggestions on how to do this online. However, I found a way that's pretty simple to do myself. So, first off, what you'll need for tools. Obviously, you've got the little graph there. It tells you different screwdrivers, hemostats, side cutters, hammer, pliers, you name it, super lube and all that stuff. Now, the lube stuff, light machine oil usually works. I didn't grab any lube because this thing was pretty still well goozed up already. I don't know if you guys can see this, but if you look down in there, yeah, you can kind of see it. Right around that shaft there, plenty of fucking grease. I know for sure my hands were covered in it by the time I was done here. As for the oil, you can get the stuff that's listed in the manual. Otherwise, I just use the same stuff I use for everything, which is this 3-in-1 oil. Picked it up at Harbor Freight for like $4. The thing I like about this one is it's got a telescoping end, which means you got a tight spot to get into, no problem. And that sucker does not leak as far as I can tell. I've used it for typewriters, I've used it for projectors, no issues whatsoever. So yeah, $4 for Harbor Freight. This will probably fix you for whatever you end up accidentally wiping dry. Now, for my tools, here's a quick and dirty list of what I've got. So, obviously you'll need a 1/4-inch nut driver. I've just got your standard Craftsman multi-head with a nut driver headset because, well, I use this thing and another thing that they don't mention that might be helpful for you. Ratcheting right angle screwdriver. Once again, Harbor Freight, I think it was like $3, but this thing is helpful when you got a bolt in a tight area that you can't get the screwdriver into. So you can use it with a wrench, but you know it's just twist, pull it off, twist, pull it off. Usual headache for manual tools. This thing makes quick work out of it, and it uses the same head. The one thing they don't mention in here, pickup tool. The little magnet pickup tool. These ones you can find practically anywhere, even at Walmart for like $2. This thing is a lifesaver, because as you will see throughout this, there's screws there, right there, all through here, that you have to pull to get these side panels off. And you can unscrew them, but unless you have a very good magnetic tip nut driver, you are not going to be able to hold on to the sucker. And you don't want to knock it down in here, because even though there's a lot of subsectionals around here, it can roll anywhere in that pan underneath those, and it is an absolute headache to get a screw out of those. First one I unscrewed before I grabbed my magnetic tool, same thing happened. Not fun. Anyways, so we got your nut driver, we got your magnetic pickup tool, ratcheting wrench, which you know is optional. Next thing I've got here, and you have to excuse the mess, I've been working on this thing for a couple days now. Obviously, a pair of arc joint pliers. This is strictly for me at least, removing the old gears, and when you get that solenoid out, which I apologize, I just finished installing that last night, so I'm not going to pull it out to show you what it looks like. The instructions are pretty good with that. You'll see there's a little pin in there, which is the solenoid itself, and it's got a little like Y-shaped piece that's got that little T-shaped solenoid in it, that T-shaped arm that engages the flipper up here that moves the slides back and forward. That's the part that usually breaks. In fact, there's some chunks of it in there still. But when you get that off of there, what you'll do is you'll get the solenoid out, use a pair of the side cutters, which is listed on here. I mean, you could use them little rinky-dink sprue cutters there, or you can use a pair of side cutters. Just make sure they got a narrow enough head to fit between that Y-link. And once you get that T-shaped piece off, you'll snip that rivet that's in there with the side cutters, and the kit comes with a new one. What you do is you slide that rivet in the hole there like it was before. Then you take these, obviously size down as small as you need it, and then if you don't have a rivet punch tool, this is the next best thing. You just squeeze the tar out of a little sucker, be careful not to break the arms off, you're good to go. Next thing you need is a little hammer. This thing is ideal for getting them gears onto things. Now you're also going to want a chunk of wood. I don't know where mine went, but you'll want that because if you'll notice, when you have to go to pound this one on, it's engaging already the, what do you call it? it's engaging the telescoping lens here. So what you're going to want to do is brace that, because if you look at that little pin right there, that's the back of that bar. If you look at all this gap space right here, you could end up seriously torquing something out of shape. So what I did is I leaned the whole thing on its side and put the wood bar under there to support it. And you can tell when you make contact, because when you lean up against that bar, this thing will start moving a little bit on its own accord. That means you're making contact with the wood. You're good to go. You'll also want it for hammering that on, which I haven't finished doing yet. I literally just set that on there. But you'll want that to brace this, because also this is a very tiny motor, and if you bend that, you're done. Maybe you'll find one online or through an electronic supply, but it's going to be an absolute pain to get a hold of. Then you got to find a way to get them rivets off and get this brace off. Not fun. Also, what you will need for one measly little screw is a 1/4 inch wrench, which I've got in my little roll here, and it's that one, to be specific. Move the wires here, right back here. Because this one, that little, not my bad, this one right here. Because this little cog and arm thing moves away enough to where you can get to the bottom screw, but you cannot get in here to save your life with a nut driver. Manual wrench is the only way to get it. Luckily, it's a short shaft screw, so it's literally got, well, like one of these here. It's got a spacer for most of it, and then just a tiny little threaded end. So it's not that big of a deal to get out of there. But once you figure you've got it loose, if it's still spinning, just take a pair of pliers or your magnetic pickup and pull it out, because it'll keep spinning inside those little grommets there. And the final tool I think you will probably need is, if I'm thinking right, let me just make sure I got everything here, a hook of some sort. Now, dental picks are what they're usually called. Alright, as I was saying, you want that little flat end, because when you get that solenoid in there, it's a little T-shaped link. Looks just like that little bugger right there. And there's a slot that is just barely wide enough to fit one tooth and the rest of this body in there. So obviously you have to have something once you get it in there that you can fit inside this cramped little hole to kind of force that part in. Now, since these are made out of polymers, they're a lot stronger, you don't have to worry about breaking that tip off. If you're trying to put the old one back, you'd be stuccoed. There's a picture of what the old one looks like. And there's that little wide piece of the rivet I was talking about. Now, here's the thing. That's a basic set of tools. Now, you might find other tricks that will help you. You might not. That's all entirely up to you. So here's what I did. I followed the instructions to get the side plates off, which, by the way they refer to the front and the side in these instructions is bull. It's a pain in the butt. You keep spinning the thing around trying to figure out where they're indexing. So, first step, ignore when I say first step next time, because that's actually the second step. First step is to remove the plate cover, which is this right here on the bottom. That's the bottom side. That's the top with your little adjustable feet and the power cord. Now, what it does here is, and I'll reposition, sorry, I don't have a good enough tripod to set this thing behind me. It sits literally right here, and that's the only screw that's kind of holding it shut. Now, you undo that screw, you lift up, and you'll realize that it's still kind of stuck there. Well, the trick is, and before you start taking out your screwdriver and going ape on all them screws down in there, pause. What you'll notice is, if you look down below here, I'll just pull this thing out just to make it obvious. You'll see right here is a hinge. There's another one on that side too, right about there. And they're pin-shaped. And if you look at the clevises here with it off, they're just little spring pieces of metal. All you really need to do, even though it sounds like it's destructive, is grab this thing and kind of wiggle it side to side and pop it right out. Now, normally it'll be connected because, as you can see, I got two wires here leading to the power cord. When you pop this thing free, you can set it off to the side, which that's what the instructions suggest. I don't like having shit floating around, because if it knocks over, it's going to take something out with it. So what I did is I pulled out on these little wires. Let me put this thing down again. Right here. And you'll see there's some wire nuts on them. I tucked them back in there because they're getting in my way. I apologize. But you'll see there's one here with the whites and one here with the solitary purple. The whites are on the ribbed section. The purple is on the smooth section of cable that's connected to the bottom of that thing. You're going to want to write that down. I did too. That's where the smooth came from on that post-it note. And then, if you just pull them wire nuts off, disconnect it, screw them right back onto here. No harm done. You've got it written down so you know how to reconnect it. And that thing is a free floater. Moving back. Now, the second part you want to do is remove that side panel, which is right here. This is the easiest part to get to because right now the screws are all three visible. You got one here, yep, one down here, and one here. Basically anything that's silver that's got a screw through it right here, all three of them you want to take off, then this should pop free just like so. Now the reason you want to get that first is because you want to get to the front here, which is right here. And the reason you want to get that one free second is because there's a screw that goes right here. Hope you all can see that little hole right there up to the side, kind of next to that light glare. That right there, if I pull it off to show you, yep, that little sucker right there is normally obstructed by that slide, so you need to get it off first. And then once you get that one loose, you got a screw here. Let me get this set so it looks like it should. You got a screw right down there next to that motor twisty. They're black, so I apologize, you can't really see them. But right, that little yellow wire nut is literally pointing right at it. And there's one down in here in the corner, right catty corner to the other side screw. Luckily, you don't need to take this side off. It's not really a necessity. But just unscrew that sucker right there. Pull this off, and then you've got access to the whole area, per se. Now, when you pull this off, this will still be connected right here, where it's got its little bracket screws, like so. And this piece, which you probably are wondering if you're following along with this, where the heck did the side plate go, sits right here to kind of hold the wires in and all that stuff. Now, I pulled this out because if you want to get decent access to be able to get those screws out with your wire nut driver, you're going to want this off, and it takes one more thing out of the way because the solenoid plate you're trying to get to is right in here. There's a little metal plate that kind of sticks up a little bit behind some wires, obviously. That's the only downside of also electronics, lots of wires. So basically, because I like to have a little bit of free wiggle room to work with, and it helps out immensely with this thing, just undo the screw right there, undo the screw right down here, and there's one little one right down there that this spot bolts into, and then this whole thing will pull free. Then you got basically a lot of room right here to do whatever with. For my case, it helped with the next step, which was unscrew this solenoid, or this motor, which involved taking out that screw there, one right behind it over here. Mind you, when this is on here, my bad. When this is actually installed, this little rod's going to be right in there. That's how you can also tell if you got this thing down far enough when you tamp it on, but I'll get to that later, is if it fights this. If it fights it and you still got some gapping right there, pound it on a little bit farther. You can tell because there's a little, I can't see it from here very well, but I've got a little bit showing in there. There's a little bit of like ribbed, almost looks like a dipstick in a transmission pattern around it to give it some traction. But anyways, moving back on. You got the side plate out. You got the little cover out of there. Next is to pull this sucker off, which there's 3 screws with rubber grommets on them, right here, right behind it, and right down below, way down here. This one and this one with the side plate off, you can kind of weasel your nut driver in there and just take them out. This one is also nut drivable. I think I actually, for all 3 of these, used that ratcheting Allen wrench because the nut driver is still a very tight fit. So I took that ratcheting screwdriver and put that nut driver bit in there and just zip, zip, zip. It was literally like maybe 2 whole turns. Then you pull this off, and since you got that side open, you can just literally set the little bugger down right there. And one thing I should have mentioned, that little magnetic pickup tool, when you're taking the sides off, where the screws are here, 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 it's still inside of it, that's where that thing comes in. Because once you get them loose to where they're literally spinning in their spot, tap, 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 tap. Screws are out. Then in my position, with these screws, I noticed they're all 1/4 inch, but some of them are a little bit more different than others. So you can take either a piece of very heavy corrugated cardboard or just paper in this case, make a diagram. Those are the screws for the side panel. That's the screws for the front panel. That's the screw for the, oh my bad, side panel, projector lens front. Those go to the little cover I pulled out of there. And those 3 go to the solenoid motor. You know, just keep it organized because they do look a little different and you'd like to get them in the right spot. Otherwise, if you're like me, you end up with screws at the end and go, okay, where the hell did those come from? anyways, so now we got that out, which frees out the playing field. And if you played it smart, and either this is deteriorating or you're just going to replace it anyways, because, you know, these are a lot heavier duty, you don't have to worry about opening this thing up again. Break that sucker off. That'll give you a little bit easier access to these screws. Now, the trick with these is, this is a sliding plate to adjust the solenoid for the depth of the throw. Now, you'd want to get it in the right, almost exact spot it was originally, because otherwise you'll get it put together, you'll try to run it, and it won't either reverse or it won't forward or reverse, but you'll hear it trying to struggle. That means you got to pull the whole thing out apart and readjust it. So what I did is I took, unfortunately it's a little bit hard to see, but if you look really closely, you can see right there, probably could have seen it a second ago, there we go, that black mark. This one kind of faded, but I can still see the shine on it. You probably can't through here, but I took a Sharpie, and I basically ran it across the top of both those metal pieces, and that gave me an outline as to where the sucker sits. So then after that, you pull those two screws out, you pull this little adjustment screw out down there. You probably can't see it, but it's right where my thumb is. There we go. Once you get those three loose, and this is a fight, it took me a little bit, but you can kind of pull up on this, wiggle side to side a little bit, wiggle it back and forth, just keep wiggling until you get the thing out. Inside there you'll see a little metal bracket with a plunger on it, which I wonder if I can get to the top here to see. Let me see if I can grab my flashlight here, folks. Yeah, I don't know where the damn flashlight went. Okay. Anyways, if you look in here, oh, is that it right there? Oh, right here. You'll see this little metal plate right here. That is the solenoid bracket. It's a big L-shaped piece of metal. Inside of it's a little black cylinder, and down below that is the plunger with the T-piece that you're replacing. Now, the easiest way to get out of there, the instructions say something about shaking it out over here and then pulling it through where the condenser lenses are. That's another thing. When you're working on this thing, make sure to hell that thing is clipped in. If these fall out and break, you're SOL. They're impossible to get a hold of unless you buy a parts projector, which is going to cost a ton of money. Just make sure that little clip is solid, or if yours seems to not be behaving properly, like if it seems really loose or something, pull them out, label which one goes towards the back, which one goes towards the front, and just lay them there. That's the other thing I have an issue with, is there's a little autofocus lens somewhere right in here that you can accidentally hit. You don't want to hit that. You'll never be able to, it won't autofocus to save your life, and you'll have to readjust the focus every time you hit this projector slide. So, try to do everything out this side. Now, if you need the extra wiggle room, you can pull this bracket off, just a little screw there, but you have to pull that off next. Then, when this is off, you'll see it kind of floating in there, the little bracket. What I did is I used the magnetic pickup tool, and luckily, as you can see, I've got really small fingers, so I reached in through here where you can get a good feel on it. You'll feel something that feels kind of like it's wrapped in electrical tape. That's the solenoid right there. And what you do is, I use my finger to push it out here, and then kind of wiggled it and levered it, like, you know, just rock it out until you get the top of that L bracket you can see through here sticking out. Then you just pull it straight back. Obviously don't yank it because there's some wires connected to it still. But pull it out, and in my case I got the solenoid out, but the plunger with the T-piece was still floating around in there. That's where little Mr. Magnetic came in handy. Literally fished him out with this thing. Just went through here, got a hold of it, directed it over into here, and grabbed it with my fingers. Now I pulled that out, I re-riveted it, all that lovely jazz. Basically took that little plunger out, put the new T-piece on, put the rivet through, pinched it, put it back in the solenoid plunger. This is the part where I wish I could show you guys because it's the most pain in the rear part, but you have to wiggle that whole thing back in here without letting the solenoid drop the plunger out, because it all fits together and it just free slides in there. It's magnetic driven. So I just tipped it in there while using the hook side of this, weaseled it through here, and held that plunger in place with it, just gently rocked it in there, and then lined it up. Now, to line it up, you're going to want this on something you can get above, because you have to be able to see through these holes. But you can't see it from here, but promise me, I swear it's there. Once you get this little metal plate out, you'll see a little rectangular hole almost directly in front of it, straight in the bottom plate. That bottom plate is actually that arm that flips side to side. So you want to get that in there, which in my case, I pushed it in here, tilted it forward, and kind of use this through here and also through that hole to maneuver the front of that T-piece, that spot right there, into the rectangle. And then when I had that in there, I leaned it back and then reached in with this and used a little flat piece to kind of push it into the hole. Now you won't feel an audible click, you won't feel any of that. I mean, it may feel like it's not in there. The way to test is to grab a hold of that thing with your fingers, or with at least one finger and one out here, and wiggle it and see if you feel any resistance. If you feel resistance in the bottom, that means it's in place. You're good. So all it's got to do is knock side or up and down to fire that thing. It'll kind of wiggle itself in there. Now, once you got that done, obviously you line this up again, push your plate back in there, wiggle the tar out of it if you have to, then just reposition using this hole up here, pushing it out, screw it in. And this way, the way you want to do it is you want to get in position, put those two nuts in, and then while you're making sure that this thing is perfectly lined up, then you put that set screw in. It should all flow together perfectly if you got it in the same exact spot. Then you want to reassemble this, which is this gear right here, which, like I said, you're going to want to take that wood board, put this thing on the floor, or if you're on a workbench where you can stand up and be above it, lean it sideways on top of that wood piece so this is hitting it. Then just take this, and it's one tool I forgot to mention, but you probably have it laying around, is you're going to want a 1/4-inch socket on an extension to go with your hammer. Because then what you want to do is, while it's sitting upright, you slide that right over that piece right there, kind of angle it the best you can, then take your hammer. I got that little ball peen somewhere around here. There it is. And whale it, like, don't go with the intent to break, but give it some good, smart hits, and you will feel it moving. Then just stop and check until you see that ribbing disappear. Once the ribbing disappears, you are golden. In my case, I didn't go all the way. I went till I could see just a hint of it still there. And then if I need to, I'll tip it sideways and knock it back down again. But, better safe than sorry in the end and having it too far. And next we'll move on to the part of installing that new cog gear. This little black sucker is probably hard to see right there, back onto the motor. We'll get to that shortly. Alright folks, as you can see, I've got the new cog perfectly hammered in there. Wasn't that difficult actually, since I got a wooden table I don't really worry too much about here. I basically just dropped it down to where that peg on the bottom of this thing is sitting right there so the axle didn't get hurt. Took my ball peen and just tapped it until it flushed out. Now it's gone on the bottom of here, but you'll notice when you pull the old gear off, there's ribbing in there, which I just took a flat blade screwdriver, kind of scraped off whatever little bits of that gear remained, and just lined that up and just kept tapping on it until it finally, you could hear the different change from the tapping. It becomes a more solid thud, as in I'm not moving kind of thud. Anybody who's worked the hammer usually knows that sound. Yep. So now I put it right back in position, lining up them holes right here. Lining up the gears, make sure you get that little piece right here in there. And then the best way to test to see if you got a working connection is look straight, and as long as this seems to be lined up with the cog, you're good to start with. Then just take some practice turns and see. As long as that cog's moving when everything's in place, which as you can see the little white one is, then that means your autofocus should work on it. So I'm going to bolt this thing on and we'll get back to you. Okay, as you can see, I got that sucker mounted right back in where it needed to be. That screw right there was the biggest pain in the rear end you can imagine. Best thing I can find out is hold the screw into your nut driver with your finger and kind of just walk it back there. Look at it from the top, and the minute you see that little unthreaded shaft go into that grommet, then go to town. Now, got that on. As you can see by twisting the little nut here, it moves that cog, and if you do it enough, you'll actually see this little piece move right here, the whole lens, so that's a good sign. It's not going anywhere, not moving around any unnecessarily. So now I'm going to do is kind of just tuck these back as best as I can and put that little shield right here that houses that little compartment on the front shaft, on the little front plate. We'll see how that goes after that.
Alright folks, sorry about the lack of video from this point on, but at the time of night I was finishing this off, really couldn't make that much extra noise thanks to sound regs in the apartment and whatnot. I did kind of do a step-by-step picture setup as to how it goes back together. And just kind of walk you through the steps I took. The first one here is I actually decided it would be a smart idea to test the operation of the projector before I got it completely put back together. Because knowing my luck, if I would have gotten it all back together, nothing would have ran right, would have had to pull it all apart again, and hey, ammo for the beginning of the video that I missed, but not exactly fun. So anywho, the first step I did was, as you can kind of see, the parts are somewhat mated back together here. I decided to run some power through it just to make sure that everything cycled properly, which I didn't put it completely back together, obviously. I just reconnected the power wires from the base back up to the main projector, plugged it in, turned it on to the second out of 3 switches, which you've got obviously the off, I believe it's low fan, high fan, and lamp. You only need it on lower high fan. Don't bother with the lamp, because one problem with these projectors and their somewhat short lifespan bulbs in comparison to other bulbs nowadays is every time you heat up that bulb and you jostle that projector, you move it, or especially if you like drop it or it, accidentally bump it against something, you weaken the life of that bulb and you could possibly shatter it, because when those bulbs are superheated, even when they're on for only a handful of seconds, makes them very vulnerable to any kind of vibrations. So, best way to avoid that, don't turn on the bulb. You don't need to test the light for this step anyways. This is all about just the functionality, but I turned it on to the low fan setting and then ran through it both on the manual controls and the remote control to make sure that the projector arm on the top there would cycle through, which you'll look down right where the projector has its little slide slot. You'll see a little black lever sticking out right next to it, and when you hit the forward and reverse, you should see it go obviously counterclockwise or clockwise depending on the direction you hit. And then also, while you're at it, test the automatic zoom function on the remote if you have it, because that'll also help to determine that you installed the zoom switch properly, which, I mean, that one is the easiest one to get to. I would have very few doubts of that being an issue if something's not running right, but you never know. Really funny things happen. And the next one was the second step of reassembling it. Obviously, I disconnected the top plate because it'd just be getting in the way of this. Always better to have more room. And I started by putting in the little L-shaped storage compartment bracket that I pulled out to get to the solenoid, which from this picture you can see there's 2 bolts you have to hit here. There's one on the bottom of the projector, one up top that bolts right into that little flange piece that kind of goes above all the wiring. And then in the second frame, as you can see, there is one more screw kind of tucked in there underneath the one to the side panel up on the very far left. That one you're going to probably want to try to get started with your magnetic pickup tool, like just to barely get half a thread started. That'll hold it in place when you put your nut driver on it. Or if you have the magnetic nut driver, you've already killed 2 birds with 1 stone. And next I put the front plate back on right around where the projector lens goes. And that one was pretty straightforward. Remember, that's the one with the little side screw that goes in there. And that one, it's pretty form-fitting. It holds itself up pretty well while you're trying to put screws on, so you don't have to worry about balancing it. And just as a little top view there as to where the screws go, you can kind of see it from this angle. You can't really see from this picture exactly where the screws go, but if you really need that information, I mean, the holes are pretty self-pointed out when you're putting it back together. You can always go back to the beginning of the video when I actually show how I took it off, and they'll become pretty obvious. It's just 2 on that panel, 1 on the front. And right now what I'm facing is the side panel, which is the last piece I put on before the bottom plate. And that one you can kind of see from this picture where the 3 screws go. It's wherever you see those little square silver-shaped protrusions on the inside of the panel, you can see like there's a hex head screw right there. And there's equally spaced, 1 on the left, 1 on the right. The middle one's a little bit offset more to the right, but you can probably see that a little bit better in the next 2 pictures here where it kind of shows that and then the final process. And then we've got the completed look with the whole bottom plate reattached to its hinges. Remember, you wiggle them off. All you got to do is just keep a close eye on them. Make sure you got those little pieces of pot metal, well, not pot metal, but those little strap hinges on the bottom plate lined up with those pin hinges, and then just give it a nice smart shove and it should lock right into place. And then from there, you've got the completed projector, which at this point, when you got everything put together, you're obviously sure it works if you tested it. Just push down on that and screw that one little flathead screw down to torque it in, and you should be good to go. And that's really all I got for you, folks. Again, I want to apologize for not starting at the beginning, but the idea of putting this together didn't occur to me until I already had it disassembled to the point where it would be an even bigger pain than it was worth to actually put it back together just to pull it apart again. And things were going so well that I didn't want to risk fate. Usually my luck is horrible when it comes to really fine detail repairs, and this one went absolutely perfect. Now, just as a side note, depends on how late you are watching this, but it will be posted from here on out on eBay for sale. Just search for ready-to-use Kodak Carousel 800H Custom. It should pop up as one of the first search results. I mean, you've obviously seen me put it back together, and I'll even try to post a video here of it running and showing some sample slides, but that's all entirely up to you. Odds are if you're watching this, you have one already and you're trying to repair it, but just in case that goes south, there will be a backup option available. That's it all I got for you, folks, and please leave any comments down below if you have any other questions or something just didn't make sense.